Have you ever stopped to observe that strange moment when you're endlessly scrolling through social media feeds and suddenly realize you're not really seeing anything? That odd sensation of being completely present, yet at the same time profoundly absent? It's as if your mind were functioning perfectly, processing information, making decisions about whether to like a photo or not, but beneath all this mental activity, there's a deafening silence, an emptiness you can't name, but that's always there, like a shadow accompanying every thought. You're not alone in this experience. In fact, you're experiencing one of the most fascinating and disturbing phenomena of our era, the emergence of hyperconscious minds that paradoxically feel less and less. Today, we're going to explore a territory that few dare to map, the strange inner world of a humanity that has developed the capacity to be aware of everything, but has lost the ability to be touched by anything. To understand how we arrived at this point, we need to go back in time and observe a silent transformation that has been happening in human consciousness for at least 3 centuries. For millennia, the human experience was characterized by a direct and visceral relationship with the world. When our ancestors saw the sun set, they didn't just observe the phenomenon, they were pierced by it. The beauty of nature wasn't something they contemplated in a detached way, but something that inhabited them completely. Their minds weren't separated from their bodies, and their bodies weren't separated from the world around them. Consciousness was fundamentally an integrated experience where thinking and feeling were inseparable aspects of the same vital process. But something extraordinary began to happen with the advent of modernity. Gradually, we developed the capacity to observe our own thoughts, to become spectators of our own experiences. This phenomenon, which philosophers call metacognition, was initially celebrated as the apex of human evolution. Finally, we were capable of thinking about thinking, of being conscious of our own consciousness. It was as if we had developed an internal organ capable of observing all the other organs functioning. It seemed to be the definitive triumph of the human mind over the limitations of immediate experience. During the 18th and 19th centuries, this new capacity for self-observation radically transformed how we understood ourselves. The Romantics discovered the inner world as an infinite universe to be explored. Scientists began to study the mind as an object of investigation. Artists began to portray not just the external world, but the most subtle intricacies of subjective experience. It was as if humanity had discovered a new continent, the territory of consciousness observing itself. But there's something deeply ironic in this story. The more we became capable of observing our feelings, the less we actually felt them. The more we developed the capacity to analyze our emotions, the less we were affected by them. It's as if the act of observing inevitably created a distance between the observer and the observed. And this distance, which initially seemed liberating, began to transform into something much more problematic. A subtle but persistent form of disconnection from our own emotional life. Think about your own experience. How many times have you caught yourself analyzing whether you're really happy in a moment that should be one of joy? How many times have you observed your own sadness as if you were a scientist studying an interesting but distant phenomenon. How many times have you found yourself thinking about love while you should have simply been loving? This capacity for self-observation, which should make us more conscious and free, often transforms us into spectators of our own lives. Digital technology has intensified this process in a way we're only beginning to understand. Our screens aren't just windows to the world. They're mirrors that constantly reflect our own mental activity. Every click, every like, every share is a form of observing our own tastes, preferences, and reactions. Algorithms show us refined versions of ourselves, creating an infinite loop of self-observation mediated by technology. We've become curators of our own experiences, editors of our own lives, professional observers of our own consciousness. Social media has amplified this phenomenon in an unprecedented way. We no longer live experiences, we document them, edit them, share them, and observe them being consumed by others. A beautiful landscape is no longer something we simply contemplate. It's something we photograph, filter, caption, and post. And throughout this entire process, part of our mind is constantly observing and analyzing our own reactions. Am I really impressed by this view? Is this experience authentically meaningful? Or am I just reacting to the potential for social approval? How will others interpret this post? This constant metacognition creates a mental state we could call reflexive hypervigilance. We're always on, always observing, always analyzing, but paradoxically, less and less present for direct experience. It's as if we had developed a mental control tower that constantly monitors all our internal processes, but in the process has become disconnected from the territory it's supposed to be supervising. The result is a peculiar type of modern suffering, the emptiness of the hyper-conscious mind. People who have access to more information, entertainment, and opportunities than any previous generation in human history, but who report unprecedented levels of anxiety, depression, and a sense of meaninglessness. It's not that these people don't have access to rich experiences, it's that they've developed a relationship with their own experiences that makes them fundamentally inaccessible. I need to pause for a moment and ask you directly, which aspect of this description resonates most with your personal experience? Do you also feel this strange combination of being completely conscious, but at the same time profoundly disconnected from your own sensations? I know we often keep these concerns to ourselves, perhaps for fear of seeming self-indulgent or dramatic, in a world that tells us we should be grateful for what we have. But your concerns are valid and probably shared by more people than you imagine. Share in the comments, I feel this emptiness, when your voice can help create a space where we can honestly discuss this collective experience instead of suppressing it. And perhaps by naming this phenomenon together, we can begin to imagine ways to transform it. This process of disconnection doesn't happen only at the individual level, it's transforming the very structure of our societies. Observe how we consume culture today. We no longer watch a movie. We watch a movie while checking social media, reading reviews in real time, and forming opinions that will later be shared and discussed. The direct experience of art is constantly being mediated by layers of analysis and interpretation. We no longer listen to music. We create playlists that reflect our identity, analyze lyrics for meaning, and use songs as soundtracks for carefully curated versions of our lives. Language itself is changing to reflect this new reality. Notice how we talk about our emotional experiences today. We say things like, I felt that I was feeling sadness, or I had the experience of being anxious. This language, which seems more precise and sophisticated, actually reveals something profound, a distance between the self that observes and the self that's supposedly feeling. It's as if we had become simultaneous translators of our own inner lives. The wellness and self-help industry has flourished precisely to serve this new form of suffering. We offer mindfulness techniques to people who are hyper-conscious but disconnected. We promote meditation as a way to observe thoughts without judgment, without realizing that the very act of observing might be perpetuating the problem we're trying to solve. We sell apps that help people monitor their moods, as if the solution to emotional emptiness were more observation and analysis. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this transformation is how it affects our relationship with time and memory. When we're constantly observing and analyzing our experiences, they lose their capacity to naturally settle in our emotional memory. Instead of memories rich in sensations and feelings, we create organized and cataloged mental files, but emptied of their original vitality. It's as if we had transformed our biography into a well-curated but lifeless museum. This new form of consciousness is also fundamentally changing how we relate to each other. Romantic love, for example, has become an intensely observed and analyzed experience. We don't just love, we observe our love, question its authenticity, compare our experience with idealized representations in media, and constantly evaluate whether we're doing it right. The result is that many people report feeling like actors playing the role of love, instead of lovers genuinely involved in the experience of love. Friendship has undergone a similar transformation. Our social interactions are constantly filtered through layers of self-observation and analysis. We observe our own communication patterns, analyze group dynamics, evaluate whether we are being authentic or performative. Even spontaneity has become something we try to cultivate consciously, creating the paradox of planned and observed spontaneity. At work, this reflexive hyperconsciousness manifests as an obsession with productivity and self-optimization. We don't just do our work, we observe our own productivity, analyze our energy patterns, measure our efficiency, and constantly adjust our methods. It's as if we had become managers of ourselves, constantly supervising the employee we supposedly are. But here's the crucial question. This transformation isn't simply an individual problem that can be solved by more willpower or better self-regulation techniques. It's a fundamental change in the structure of human consciousness that emerges from the material and technological conditions of our time. The hyper-conscious but emotionally empty mind isn't a personal failure. It's an evolutionary adaptation to the demands of a world that requires constant self-monitoring, analysis, and adjustment. We live in a society that demands we simultaneously be productive workers, informed consumers, engaged citizens, available friends, attentive romantic partners, responsible parents, and self-realized individuals. To fulfill all these functions, we've developed a capacity for observation and analysis that allows us to efficiently navigate between different contexts and expectations. But the price of this efficiency is a subtle form of alienation from our own lived experience. Information technology accelerates and amplifies this process, but doesn't create it. The conditions for the emergence of the hyperconscious mind were established long before smartphones and social media. They emerged with the development of industrial capitalism, which required workers to become observers of their own productivity, with urbanization, which created social contexts that required constant adaptation and self-monitoring, and with formal education, which taught generations to analyze and categorize their own experiences instead of simply living them. So, what do we do with this understanding? How can we navigate a world that seems to demand hyperconsciousness while we simultaneously long for a more direct and vital connection with our own experience? The answer isn't to try to return to a state of pre-reflexive innocence that probably never existed in pure form, nor to passively accept this condition as inevitable. Instead, we can begin to develop what we might call an ecological consciousness about our own inner life, just as we've learned to understand our environmental impact and make more conscious choices about how we interact with the natural world. We can learn to observe our patterns of self-observation and make more intentional choices about when to observe and when to simply be present. This doesn't mean completely eliminating our capacity for metacognition, which is a valuable tool for navigating the complexity of modern life. It means, instead, developing a wiser and more balanced relationship with this capacity. We can learn to recognize the moments when self-observation is serving a genuine purpose, and the moments when it has become just a habit that disconnects us from our own vitality. An important clue can come from observing that certain activities and contexts still manage to transport us to states of more immediate presence. For some people, this happens during intense physical exercise, where the immediate demand of the body overpowers mental chatter. For others, it occurs during experiences in nature, where the vastness and beauty of the natural world temporarily silences the internal observer. For many, it happens during creative experiences, where the process of creation completely absorbs attention. What these experiences have in common is that they engage our attention in a way that makes self-observation temporarily irrelevant or impossible. They remind us that we're still capable of more integrated and vital states of consciousness, and perhaps more importantly, they show us that these states aren't a regression to a more primitive form of consciousness, but a more mature integration between our capacity for observation and our capacity for direct experience. The development of wisdom in relation to our own consciousness might involve learning to transition more fluidly and intentionally between different modes of being. There are moments when analysis and self-observation are genuinely valuable, when we're trying to understand a destructive pattern of behavior, when we're making important decisions, when we're learning new skills. And there are moments when they're just noise that prevents us from being genuinely present to what's happening. The question isn't to eliminate the internal observer, but to educate its attention. We can learn to recognize when our metacognition is serving life and when it has become an escape from life. We can develop the capacity to consciously choose when to observe and when to simply be. And we can cultivate the courage to tolerate periods of not knowing, of non-analysis, of simple presence with what's happening in our experience. This also means rethinking our relationship with technologies that amplify our tendency toward constant self-observation. We don't need to completely reject digital technology, but we can develop a more conscious and intentional relationship with it. We can create spaces and times in our lives that are protected from the constant demand for documentation, analysis, and sharing. We can practice the art of having experiences that aren't immediately transformed into content for our own or others' consumption. Perhaps more fundamentally, we can begin to question some of the cultural premises that feed this form of conscious emptiness. The idea that more consciousness is always better, the belief that we should be able to constantly optimize our experience, the expectation that all our experiences should be meaningful and transformative, the pressure to always be productive in our relationship with ourselves. There's something deeply radical in simply allowing some experiences to exist without being observed, analyzed, or improved. There's a form of political resistance in refusing the cultural demand for constant self-optimization. And there's a form of wisdom in recognizing that some aspects of human experience are better preserved when they're not excessively illuminated by the light of reflexive consciousness. This isn't a romanticization of unconsciousness or a defense of ignorance. It's a recognition that wisdom involves knowing not only how to think, but when not to think. How to observe, but also when to stop observing. How to analyze, but also when to simply accept the irreducible mystery of lived experience. If these reflections have touched something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found words to express, know that you're not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not just understanding, but also wiser ways of living amid the transformations we're witnessing. This isn't just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us on this continuous journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided. Because in the end, the emptiness of the hyperconscious mind isn't just a personal problem to be solved, but a symptom of a broader transformation in the human condition that we're all navigating together. And perhaps it's precisely in the shared recognition of this condition that we can find the first steps toward a wiser and more vital form of being conscious in the world, a consciousness that doesn't flee from direct experience, but embraces it. A mind that observes, but also knows when to stop observing and simply live.
You really not use a smartphone?
For many years, I just didn't have a phone. Then it became too difficult because, again, many services just demanded, like the bank or the doctor, that I have a phone. So I keep it, but I try to use it instead of being used by it. It's not on me all the time. I'm not addicted to it. I'm not checking it all the time. I try to use it as a tool.
Since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, they had the hijab laws, which says that every woman, when she goes out, walking or even driving in her private car, she must wear the hijab. And until today, the regime had difficulty enforcing the hijab laws because they didn't have, millions of police officers that you can place on every street. A police officer, if a woman drives without a headscarf, immediately she's arrested and fined or whatever. In the last few years, they switched to relying on an AI system. Iran is now crisscrossed by surveillance cameras with facial recognition software, which recognizes automatically if in the car that just passed by the camera, the facial recognition software can identify that this is a woman, not a man, and she's not wearing the hijab, and identify her identity, find her phone number, and within half a second, they send her an SMS message saying, you broke the hijab law, your car is impounded. And it's not like there is a report that goes to the court and some human judge goes over the data and decides what to do. The AI immediately decides, okay, the car is confiscated. Writing history is somewhere in between kind of science and art. To write a history book, it's not an equation. You need to tell stories. So I also, to some extent, I see myself as an artist. And I don't know if I'll still be writing books in 5 years or 10 years, because maybe by the 2030s, AIs will write books like Sapiens and Nexus so much better than me that it will be kind of almost meaningless for a human being to engage in that. The amount of information that I can gather is infinitesimal compared to the AI. Yeah. I've already seen, these wonderful stories written by AI, and I agree that humans will always want to create for the joy of creating, as children do. But would it still be valued? Until today, it's not just that we liked doing it, it was extremely valuable. Nothing on planet Earth could be as creative as us. And now in more and more fields, there is something.